And I'm sure that's what the reason it's done like the racing now. It's not
Good to go. Good morning. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Heather Salim, and I serve as a policy analyst for the Underground Safety Board. Welcome to the Electronic Positive Response Workshop. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to go over some important safety information for all who are here. For those attending virtually, please take a moment to vote. For those attending right now, please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the emergency exits and evacuation procedures. For those in the room, should we need to evacuate, please proceed down the stairs and exit the building to the left or the right of the stairs. Our meetup location is at Franklin D. Roosevelt Park at 9th and P Street, as you can see on the map. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we gathered today on the ancestral homelands of the Nisenan people. Sacramento was a gathering place for many local tribes who have lived throughout the Central Valley and the foothills for generations, and were the original stewards of this land. We would like to acknowledge the Southern Maidu people to the north, the Valley and the Plains Miwok people to the south of the American River, and the Footwind Wintun people to the west of the Sacramento River. Please join me in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude for our Indigenous neighbors and for their enduring care and protection of our shared lands and waterways. I'll turn it over to our chair for today, Member Johnson and Member Charlin, for introductory remarks.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Marshall Johnson. I'm the newest member of this committee, probably the least experienced, probably. And I serve as the Underground Safety Board member and a member of the Ticket Process Committee. Today, we are hosting this workshop to discuss electronic positive response, EPR, a key component on excavation safety under the DIG Law Act. The intent of this workshop is to ensure that EPR codes are effective, clear, and practical for all stakeholders involved in excavation safety. As part of our ongoing effort to enhance compliance with the Dig Safe Act, we aim to refine EPR processes to improve communication between utility operators and excavators. This session is an opportunity for stakeholders, operators, excavators, and industry experts to share their experiences, challenges, and recommendations to improve EPR compliance and effectiveness. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Member Charlin, should be on the web, to introduce himself and provide an overview of today's objectives. Member Charlin.
How am I coming in?
Nobody.
Coming in good? All right. All right. Thank you, Member Johnson. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Randy Charlin, and I also serve as an Underground Safety Board member and a member of the Ticket Process Committee. I'd like to go over a few workshop objectives for today's meeting. We'd like to hear firsthand from operators and excavators about how they use the EPR in their daily work. We want to learn about common obstacles, effective strategies, and opportunities for improving the EPR usage. We would like your input on how effective are the current EPR codes. Do they facilitate excavation communication, or are refinements needed? Can we identify any gaps in the EPR process that inhibit understanding and implementation of the EPR? We would appreciate your feedback on these EPR codes, and we'd like, what could make these codes clear or improve their usage and comply with the Dig Safe Act. I'll now turn this back over for the additional discussion.
Thank you. To start our discussion, we will first hear from stakeholders about how they currently use EPR codes. The Ticket Process Committee wants to gather insights on challenges and potential improvements related to the EPR process. Specifically, we would like to learn about the following. What are some of the common challenges operators and excavators face using EPR in their daily locating and excavating tasks, respectively? Are there any specific issues with how EPR is currently implemented that impact efficiency or accuracy of the communication process? For those attending via webinar, please use the raise hand feature or dial *5 if you're calling in. When your name is called, unmute yourself using the microphone button or by dialing *6. Please state your name and organization before speaking. We will take online comments first and then move in to in-person. So far. Standard, no answers. Is there someone with a hand raised? There are no answers. No hand raised. Thank you. We will invite comments from in-person attendees now. Please go ahead, state your name and organization before speaking. Thank you.
This is James Wingate from USA North 811. I'll comment to hopefully get the ball rolling a little bit. One of the complaints that we hear at the center, and I know one reason that got this workshop started at least a while ago was contractors saying that some of the codes they didn't feel like had legal backing, as far as an excavator would say, I'm being delayed because of this code that a utility operator is telling me. Where does it say in the law that they can delay my excavation for that reason? So I welcome the review by this regulatory group to put some standards that everyone can agree and that can have Robin's blessing or whoever to confirm that it was happening according to the law. But a couple of the things I would encourage focus on is clarity on whether or not the excavator can begin digging with that code. For example, if they say, well, just whatever reason of why it wasn't marked, or we've agreed on a negotiated marking schedule, if there's kind of a green light, red light, whether or not the excavator can start, because sometimes the excavators ask us that question and we don't know. And I'm not just saying that because I'm looking to deflect questions from us. It illustrates that, how many excavators don't know that aren't asking that question. And so, and this is a topic nationally, and I was talking with some of my counterparts from other one-call centers just last week about it. And the term that I'm hearing nationally is what they're calling excavation readiness. In other words, how often, it's not just how often did every utility operator respond on time to the provided a response, but how often is the ticket excavation ready? Or how long until the excavation is ready compared to the legal start date? So you can see how this could be a metric to understand if utility operators are responding on time versus, and we could compare that to ticket size and location and get a feel for, is it excavators are asking for too much, or how can we help all be on the same page to where excavators can complete their job efficiently and without damage, right? Because that's really what we all want. Instead of having an adversarial relationship between an excavator and a utility operator, but that we have them both wanting to let the excavator come in, get their work done, be out, restore as appropriate without having any damage. So anyway, excavation readiness is the term I had not heard until just recently, but I don't know if we want to follow that but some way to track whether or not the excavator can dig, I think would be good.
Thank you.
So if I understand the question correctly, or point is it to define the EPR code better to let you know whether or not to proceed, you can proceed,
Yeah.
or not to proceed, because there could be certain codes that says, okay, even with this, you may proceed, and a code that says, yeah, you got this issue and you cannot proceed.
Exactly. Yeah.
Member Charlton has run hands.
Yeah, this is member Charlene. Can I ask James, I think it'll be helpful, James, if you give us a little background. I know when this came up years ago, when the EPR codes were established, one of the board members asked, where do these come from? How did these who decided what these codes were? And I'd like this workshop, this group, to understand that there is a TCC committee at both one call centers, and they established these. And if you can go into that, James, because I know they were established and then they were reviewed and then adds and deletes were done. I think a lot of deletes, but can you just give a quick background that these are the groups that decided them, and what the board was looking for is now the public and from other people who were not included in the safe boards to actually give their input.
I can give that a try. I'm looking at the attendees on the board and I see AD, and assuming that's Ann, she could do it better than I can because she was there and I wasn't when the very first time this happened. But my understanding is that early 2017, the Dig Safe Act had been implemented, and the two centers, USA North and Dig Alert, were instructed to build the system, at least from a technology perspective, and it's voluntary at first, to where utility operators can report how they responded to a ticket. And so at the time, the two centers, we have a committee, we call it the Ticket Continuity Committee, TCC for short. And that's made up of board members from both centers, but also excavators, and others who deal with tickets every day and know a lot about tickets. This is a little more in the weeds type of a committee where we're talking policy and procedure related to ticket creation and execution. And so the TCC reached out to some other states and found, what are you guys doing? Because some states have had this in place for decades. Electronic positive response, to have it be required. And so we thought, well, let's get some lessons learned. And my understanding is that, what we heard was some states have very few codes, some states have a lot. And we thought the sweet spot was somewhere in the middle, but definitely leaning toward the lower side, because we'd heard some states have, trying to remember which one, but one of them is close to 100 codes. And even now with our about 30, there's still some times when the codes are interpreted differently by the utility operators about how to use them and under what circumstances. And also some of the codes, we intended to be used on new tickets only, not on revisions, or vice versa. And instead, we're finding that they're kind of getting used all over the place. So this kind of cleanup that we're attempting to do here is definitely a good thing in my mind. But anyway, so the Ticket Continuity Committee came up with the original codes. But again, not just board members from the centers, meaning from utility operators. There were excavators involved. And that committee took another look at them not too long ago, and made some tweaks that we put in place to drop a few codes that we thought were redundant, or that were not being used quite the way we anticipated. Some of this is just, hindsight's 2020, right? We're learning as we go. And so I envision what this group here is going to do will be the next iteration, but it probably won't be final. I would be surprised if it is final, just like the law is never final, and the ticket system evolves, and I'd imagine that technology will give more options in the future and so on, but definitely time for a start. But anyway, that's how it got started. So I don't know if that is enough background, Randy, but you could call him the true expert if you want. And looks like AD's got a hand up, so that person may be able to provide better.
I'm gonna go ahead and unmute. Thank you.
This is Randy Sharlin. So yeah, thanks James for the background. The reason I wanted to point that out is these codes were not just put together really quick and someone just said, these sound good. There was a lot of discussion. There was a back and take and hours of meeting together. The North board members came down to the South, I believe, and we worked on this for a lot of hours and a lot of things were discussed. So I want to make kind of put some history behind it, that there was a lot of discussion behind these to come out with the best codes that we possibly could. And then, like James said, just recently we reviewed them and said, you know what, a lot of these are not getting usage. They're very low. Let's remove all these. So I think the refining that we need to do is important. And like James says, it's going to be probably continuous, but that's kind of how they were established by these groups, and we sure could use input at today's workshop. Thank you, James.
Well. Senator Johnson. Yeah, Anne, go ahead.
Thank you, Ann Diamond Diggler. I just want to check, since last week I had a problem with my unmuting. I'm unmuted this time. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Perfect. The only thing I would add to what James said is that because there was a comment kind of made about the underground safety board not being involved in these these electronic positive responses. It's because the underground safety board did not form until January of 2018. And January of 2018, the centers had to be able to have operators provide electronic positive response if they wanted to. And as both Member Charland and James mentioned, this was not just, oh, these sound like good ones. We talked about this for months in advance to make sure that this is what the operators felt that they could use to educate the excavators on what the status was of what they had done out in the field. Thank you.
Thank you all for your comments. Really appreciate it. We will move to the next section. Still trend EPR practices and usage. The following questions. When updates to EPR occur, how are these changes implemented and what challenges arise in the process? Some operators use internal system codes in addition to a standard EPR codes list. How do these internal codes align with EPR codes, and what considerations may arise for it when updates are made to those EPR codes? For those attending via webinar, please raise hand or dial *5 if you're calling in, and when your name is called, please unmute yourself using the button, or by dialing *6. Please state your name and organization before speaking. We will come back to the webinar comments. Let's start with in-person attendees. Please state your name and organization before speaking. Thank you.
I can speak to some things. Keep in mind, I've been away for a while. But from an operator's perspective, when the codes are changed, added, it impacts that particular operator if he has his own system, but they have to required to go in and make changes to their systems, as well as some of the existing systems that typically are out there. May not be as difficult to do it, but one of the things that used to impact me was some of the codes from a utility perspective. Some codes that they use are designated just for their type of business, whereas some of the codes may not be exactly like the code that you're trying to implement or use it for. And so it impacts the other utility because that code is designated for something special that they do in their business. So now you either have to go back and require more programming. Things have changed. It's a lot more difficult than it would be for someone simple. And major utilities like power, gas, telephone, more heavily impact because they do have their own systems. They do have their emergency response codes that they use for tracking for that they do to their regulators as well as to their internal company. Because they have other field services, they don't just have locating, they have maintenance, they have installation, construction. And those codes that they want to keep them as simple as possible, but sometimes you might need water. You introduce codes that they have to use.
We have 2 hands raised. We have a hand raised from Steve Cleaver. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
I just it remuted automatically. I just want to make sure you guys can hear me now.
Yes.
So to respond to the specific question, how do they align? How do our codes align with EPR codes? There are many more EPR codes established by the 811 centers than PG&E uses. And while I assume most people know me in the room, to follow the practice, my apologies. This is Steve Cleaver from PG&E. We don't use all of the codes that are available to us for EPR. Essentially, we have policies and procedures that require us to respond to locates in a limited number of ways. We give guidance to our locators that these are the only acceptable ways to respond to a ticket. So we don't give them all of the different possible options. For example, we do not have an EPR code in our system that maps to extenuating circumstances or to natural disaster as a response in our ticket response, essentially, that we're going to be delayed because of one of those. We only have so many responses. And then every year we do an evaluation of our internal responses and make sure that they are aligned and mapped correctly to an available EPR code. We have an internal committee that reviews to make sure that our internal responses are properly aligned, and then we'll work with the one call centers to ensure that they're seeing our responses correctly. And we do that on a somewhat regular basis, generally annually, to evaluate that. But to summarize, we only use a handful of EPR codes. Those are established by internal procedures, and those are mapped to the appropriate EPR response. That's all I have.
Thank you so much.
If I can add to that, some companies are national operators. And so a national operator, you're not just making a change internally within California, you're making a change across the country. And so to have all the codes being different numbers or selections, they have to do that within every one of their systems to make sure that the right code is being used. And that's a lot of work to do and a lot of cost to their business at that time.
Thank you. You have a hand raised by Member Charlie.
Thank you. This is Randy Sherlin. So that's what I was going to bring up is these ticket managing systems that locators use. Some are limited on what responses the technicians in the field can use. So in my experience, all the codes are not used. And then when there's a discrepancy, I know the one call centers, I believe, will say that there's a comment section that you can kind of put in some comments. And again, that's something our company or the company I work for, in my experience, they did not use the comments because they could not control. It's kind of a free form of what could go in there. However, when there is a discrepancy, there is an issue, and it doesn't correctly identify the issue out in the field, a phone call is made. So that's why it's really important on who the contact phone number is, because that's where additional information will come back to the caller on exactly what the issue is and how to get it resolved.
Thank you, Member Charlton. We have another hand raised by Mike.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Mike Marrero, USIC. So wanted to speak to one of the challenges with EPR. When codes are changed, or just when internally we update our ticket management system to allow or not allow locators to choose certain codes, as Randy and Steve have spoke to. Sometimes that can create some issues. Some of our customers, some of the utilities have their own ticket management system. So when we complete a ticket or close a ticket or status a ticket, it doesn't go directly to the one call center 100% of the time. Sometimes it filters through the utility first. And then the utility sends that positive response to the 811 center. Now, if the mapping isn't matching, our status isn't mapped correctly to the utilities ticket management team's status, then there's a gap in that communication back to the 811 center. And so the tickets kind of get hung up at that second system. So we find that sometimes after a month or two, an audit occurs, and yet we see, hey, what's going on? There's 100 or 1,000 tickets that look like they're past due. In reality, they've been closed, but there was an issue with the mapping, and it didn't get sent to the one call center. So that's one of the issues that can happen. But we monitor that. We can quickly resolve that. But as you change and update EPR codes, that's just one of the risks that's out there that needs to get addressed and looked at.
Thank you. Sure.
My name is Matt with SMUD. We only have 8 of us, so we have a small enough group to where we the comment section, we have some standard comments or kind of trusted enough to where people can type in what they want. No one will get to the escalator if they look. One issue that we have though is we have 2 utilities, 2 SMUD utilities for electric. And so a lot of our responses are divided between the 2. So we need to make sure that one half of the house uses it their way with standard notes or with phone calls or with scheduling, and the other half uses it the other way. So that's an issue we run into. We tend to use more. I think we have, like, if I look at my responses, I think we probably have 30 that we tie one way or another to the responses that they have for us. But you can also use it as a leverage for when a contractor doesn't want to give us time. Traffic control, you can use it as to buy yourself time when they submit too large of a ticket, stuff like that. That's just a couple of the ways we use it.
Thank you. There are no more comments. We'll move on to the next section. Thank you all for the comments. Next up, we want to hear from stakeholders about the information they need from an EPR. Do the current EPR codes provide the necessary information for excavators in the field? Are there instances where additional guidance or clarification would be beneficial? If so, please explain. Are there any challenges faced by excavators when interpreting various EPR codes? Yes, Steve. We have a comment.
Was that for me?
Yes.
To speak to James's point earlier, I do believe from the excavator side of things, which I also represent for our company, the knowing whether or not the action or verifying that the action is complete by the excavator or by the operator, pardon me. So having some sort of a flag on the EPR code that says that the action performed by the excavator is complete, or that it's an ongoing action, or still requires some additional activity by the operator, I think would be a value add. I don't know that it's a requirement or a required thing, but I do think from being very clear with the excavator as to the action that was taken by the operator, that it's been concluded or that there is some sort of ongoing task. And I do believe that there's a possibility to map that just to the different response types, to create some sort of flag or ID for the excavator that this operator, of all of the different operators on the ticket, this one's complete, this one's complete, this one's complete, and this one, while they provided an EPR, it's not a complete response and they're still pending. So it lets me know that I have some either follow-up to do by contacting the operator to find out what they still need, whether it's access or they had a question about delineations or something like that, or that they just haven't been able to get out there to respond to market at all. So I do think that there is an opportunity for improving the clarity of communication on the finalization of an action on a ticket.
Thank you, Mike. We have another hand up by Steve.
That was Steve. We have another hand up from Mike Pereira.
Oh, thank you, Steve. Sorry for the confusion. You can unmute yourself now. Thank you.
Hi, Mike Murrow, USIC. So one of the gentlemen in the room, he mentioned something about traffic control, and I wanted to jump on that as well. So one of the national initiatives we have is trying to improve safety in the field. And when it comes to traffic control, particularly in high speed areas or in busy intersections, there isn't really a positive response code that allows us to communicate with the excavators that, hey, there's going to be a delay because we need to close down a road or a lane, or some type of other means to ensure that the technician's safe when they do the locate. Also helps because the excavator a lot of times has their own road closures or their own traffic control, work zone protection, and helps us coordinate efforts with them to maybe locate while they have those up. So I think if we're looking at improving positive response codes, if adding something's not always great, but adding some type of safety awareness of, hey, this is a busy intersection or a high speed area, we're going to need some additional time to ensure safety so we can get it located properly. I think that would be a good thing to keep our field folks safe.
Can I ask a question, Mike? Were you aware that was an EPR code until recently?
I was not, no. Currently, I think to somebody's point, we use a lot of no access to help mitigate that, but I didn't know that used to be a code.
Yeah, so we had a traffic control, and if I remember right, Ann could probably tell us, it was only used really low, less than 1% for sure. And so that, I believe, was the reason it was removed.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
But I think the point I want to make is some of these codes, we didn't do a good job of getting them out to everybody that they knew was an option. So could have been some of the reasons that some of these didn't get used. Just not doing a good job of relaying what is available. All right.
Thank you all for the comments. Now we will move on to the next section of our workshop, which is focused on EPR code categories. Across different states, we have observed that EPR codes are categorized into groups such as marked, unmarked, and cleared to make communication process clearer. States like Florida, Utah, and Indiana have similar EPR code structures for their excavation communication between operators and excavators. Here are a few examples of such codes. This one is an example from Utah. That's their whole response list, and it is categorized into different groups. Moving on to the next slide, we will see this one is from Indiana. They also have some sort of categorization. This is not a complete list, but the complete list is available at their Indiana 811 website. The Ticket Process Committee wishes to learn the following and explore whether a similar approach in California would be beneficial for relevant stakeholders. If California were to adopt a similar category system for EPR codes, how would this impact the various stakeholders and efficiency of the EPR system? Are there any other code category suggestions? If so, please explain your reasoning. For those attending via webinar, please use the raise hand feature or dial *5 if you're calling. And when your name is called, please unmute yourself or dial *6. We can move into the in-person attendees now. Please state your name and organization before speaking. Thank you.
Mike, this is Marshall, and also Randy, sorry.
We can go ahead.
Okay. Since you guys have pretty much a lot of these states like Florida, Utah, and Indiana, and other states, what do you find to be better, beneficial out there based on the operators and the excavator? 3 simple codes seem pretty easy, but what do you think?
Was that question to me, Marshall?
Yeah, you and Mike, yes.
Yeah, I mean, we'd like to have the code available that displays what the issue is. And I guess we're kind of not happy with the removal of that the delineations do not mark, because now we're forced to use no delineation, which that's not really the issue. So that now requires a phone call trying to get to the right person who, in most cases, when we start having issues, it's not the person we absolutely need to talk to out in the field. It's somebody in the office or somebody responsible for calling in tickets. And we're trying to relay an issue and clarify what the problem is, because if you go online, it just says no delineations. Well, there are delineations. They're just not correct. They're not matching the description. So they mark the wrong side of the street, or they don't go from this street to this street. So there's confusion. And it used to be a code that said, the delineations do not match, and now that has been removed. So we are for, I guess, even though it increases the amount of codes, is to be an accurate code describing what the issue is. But I got to clarify that all of the ones that are available, we do have, staff across the United States that's, hundreds, if not thousands of locators that we got to kind of give them a limited number of options, because just can get out of hand on what they could choose from, the drop down menu. We like it to be smaller than larger. But I mean, hopefully that answers this question, is to describe what's really the issue out in the field, clarification on that it's marked, you're good to go, and if it's not, what the issue is.
Thanks, Randy. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah. So thanks, Marshall, for asking the question. I'll try to give an answer. So I mean, I think it's pretty clear that locator, excavator, utility communication is key to reduce late locates, to reduce damages, and to reduce delays for excavators. It's a key component of that. And this positive response is a key component of that in communication. So I think to Randy's point, there's a lot of positive response codes right now in California and across the country. It varies from state to state. Some states have a half a dozen, and some states have over 30. Um, we don't use all the codes typically in the field. We narrow it down to just specific choices, mark, clear, ongoing projects, those types of things, no access. But I think what will be beneficial is those positive response codes to be more exact in the communication, because they're pretty most of them are pretty generic, and while they're giving some type of information, there's probably opportunity to give better information.
Thank you, Mike. Yes.
Matt and Smud, I would agree with that with the exact part. Like for marked, we have marked, mark flagged, and mark flagged offset. Those are three we use. They all goes back to marked. We also use those for like field. If we get a damage, they can look at the response, and if we put offset, they're gonna go look for offsets. But the more exact, I think, would help the contractor. But the other issue is, we run into it all the time as locators. I think 50% of the time, they're not even looking at the responses. They're not looking to see if it was marked or if it had a standby required. They're just submitted the ticket Monday, Wednesday morning, they're gonna start working. So we can do what we want to try to narrow it down and make it more clear, but fact is that a lot of them don't look. But as for adding another category, I would think a safety one, like defining that, like what reason it's not safe would be beneficial. Because you do run into those issues. I did bring up the traffic because that's just a job I had recently, but there's a lot of busy streets. People don't know how to drive. Can only get out there so early before it becomes dangerous just to be out there in the dark.
Thank you. We will move on to the next set of questions. Same category. Would these categorizations be helpful for excavators to understand the status of locator mark on the excavation site? Do operators have any concerns with categorizing EPR codes in this way, and how would this affect EPR communication? Some of these questions we did address, but if anyone has more comments on these specific questions, please do so. We will start with the webinar comments first. Please raise your hand or dial *5 and unmute yourself or dial *6. Please start by stating your name and organization. Thank you. We will come back to that. Any in-person comments? Let's move to the next section then, EPR, code removal and revisions. Now we will examine the suggested removal and revision of EPR codes, which were considered either redundant, ambiguous, or non-statutory. To help evaluate the current suggestions around EPR codes, the Ticket Process Committee wishes to learn more on the following questions. Are the proposed removals and revisions clear and effective in improving EPR communication? Are there any additional EPR codes that should be removed or revised? Or are there any EPR codes that were suggested for removal and revision that should be reconsidered? If so, please explain your reasoning. For those attending via webinar, please raise hand and dial *5 if you're calling in. And when your name is called, please unmute yourself or dial *6.
You have a comment from Enrique Miranda?
Hello, Brandon. You can unmute yourself now. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the opportunity. I am trying to find and follow along where the codes are, the latest codes. Is this, I'm in the Diggler website now, and I just found revision effective 1/1/2025. I believe the changes were released 10/29/24. Is that the latest set of changes that I'm looking at here? Just to confirm that I'm looking at the right response codes, because my understanding is that some of them have changed.
Yeah, James is nodding his head, yes.
One more time?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, the most recent changes took effect on January 1, 2025.
Okay, got it. Yeah, that's all I had. Before I answer, I just wanted to look at what the latest response codes are. Thank you.
We have another hand up by Steve. You can unmute yourself now. Thank you.
I think that Enrique was asking a similar question of what I still have, because I feel like I'm lost on the context of the question. The proposed removals and revisions clear and effective. Which proposed removals are we talking about? Are we talking about the ones that were most recently removed by the ticket continuity committees of the one call centers? Or are we talking about something different? I went back to the agenda and the questions that were on there and here, and I haven't been able to piece together specifically what we're talking about, the proposed removals and revisions.
It would be nice if you can start with the agenda, the one that we had in December. That would be nice. But if you have any general comment around this topic, you can also state that. That would be all right. Thank you.
I'm sorry. My question was, what are we referring to on the proposed removals? Is that what was proposed by the one call centers, or is there a separate list of proposed removals that we're talking about? Because I'm not
This is
seeing
from
that in the agenda.
Yeah, this is from like December board meeting, the staff report presented in that.
It's like there's a footnote in the agenda.
Yeah, it should have a footnote inside of the agenda if you want to look.
If those in the room, there's a copy.
We can take a short break, if people want to like spend some more time looking at the course itself, and we can join again at 11:05. Thank you. That's fine. Welcome back, everyone. I'll go over the questions again. EPR code removal and revisions. The questions were, are there proposed removals and revisions clear and effective in improving EPR communication? Are there any additional EPR codes that should be removed or revised? Are there any EPR codes that are suggested for removal and revision that should be reconsidered? If so, please explain why. We have on the screen the list of codes for everyone to see. For those attending via webinar, please use the raise hand feature or dial *5 if you're calling in. When your name is called, please unmute yourself using the microphone button or by dialing *6.
So let me put some time frame around everything. The board staff put together this recommendation back and presented it to the board back in December. And I guess in October or so, or September, the one call centers were already working on this prior to staff's proposed recommendation. And not staff, but the one call centers got together, they actually looked at some of the things that the staff had done. And pretty much lines with what staff came up with. So what you see on the one call website should match up with the recommendation removals reflected on the webinar, as you see. That correct, James? And Ann?
James Woodgate, USA North 811. I'm hesitant to say yes for sure unless I do them all line by line, but yeah, the thought was we knew that it was time to redo the codes, and hearing that you guys were going to discuss it helped us be a little more motivated to do it sooner, I suppose. So I'd have to look up when the TCC met, but I want to say September, and Ann could probably tell you off the top of her head, but and she's got her hand up, looks like, but we met in the fall before our October board meeting because Diggler had their meeting, their board, and then USA North had our board meeting at the end of the month, and both boards passed the changes that the TCC recommended, and we created a sheet that's a little different than this, and so before I say they're exactly the same, I'd have to line these two. I probably should have done that prior to this meeting. I'm sorry I didn't do that, but some of them are, I'm sure, are likely the same, but not all, because I know that I talked about some of the recommendations that you guys had in December and thought, well, we better talk about those. So, but I guess what I'm saying is what we have in the packet for today is a little bit outdated in that it's looking at the codes as they were before we made those changes. And we voted on that in October, but had them be effective January 1, just from a reporting perspective to have it all take place. And so we could get the word out to our members that, hey, these codes are going away effective January 1. So they had November and December to plan for that. This didn't require so much system changes on their side. Adding new stuff causes changes, but saying, here's a big list and we're knocking off a few from the list, that's not as big of a deal in terms of impacting our members. So we didn't have any negative pushback that I'm aware of, at least I didn't at my center from those. A couple of hands are up. They maybe have different perspectives on this too.
The first two, Ann Diamond.
Thank you, Ann Diamond Diggler. Absolutely correct, both Member Johnson and James. A lot of these that are listed on the codes for removal have already been removed. 11, 12, 13, 30, 32, and 52. Now, we found that there were some issues with 42, which was excavator canceled request. That should be that should have been a system only code. It has been changed to that. James is correct. It was in October, at the beginning of October, that the Ticket Continuity Committee met. It was after SB 778 was signed, that would go into effect January 1. We weren't just looking at EPR codes, we were also looking at any changes in the law that the centers might need to do to be consistent in what we provide both our operators, the owners of the underground lines, and excavators, so that we can be as consistent and the same as possible. So this information that was provided at the December meeting, the Dig Alert and USA North had already gotten rid of a lot of what they have on here. Thank you.
So what we're here discussing now are the codes that are still, staff has presented to us if there's any concerns or issues with those codes. And then whatever comes out of that recommendation back to the board, if passed or not passed, then that would go back to the one call centers for their boards and their discussion. So, but it goes back to the first point that we talked about, is the impacts to a utility operator who has systems and they have to make changes. And like James mentioned, remove a code is probably not a big cost or something they can do on the fly. But when you start adding codes and modifying codes, there would be some issues and concerns probably around cost as well as timeframes to do the program. Because even though something that in January we agreed today or whenever the next board meeting is, their time has to be given to the operator of those who have systems to make those changes, along with the one cost center has to time to make those changes as well as budget constraints.
Thank you. We have another hand up for Steve.
Hi there. I do think that it would be beneficial to look at what is current in the EPR system versus what's here. I fortunately have the benefit of being at my home office and having them up next to each other. So I'll tell you that 11, 13, and 30 no longer exist in the system, but 31 does. Requires a standby at the time of excavation, contact facility owner. And if you look at the explanation for removal, imposes unlawful requirement to contact facility owner. I agree that it is unclear on the locate and mark status, but the standby requirement is oftentimes not just established in state code, but for gas and oil, it's established in federal code, essentially requiring all excavations within proximity to certain high priority facilities to be monitored excavations. And the standby is what meets that requirement. So while PG&E does not use code 31, we use a smaller subset of these codes and then communicate in addition to that through direct email with notes of what the locator did out in the field and or communicated with the excavator. I want to recognize the importance of being able to communicate this to the excavator, whether it's through the EPR or otherwise. And that's just on code 31. The removal of code section 32, it no longer exists. But 33, let's see. Pardon me, 34, field meet required. This is in a system, there are two between 33 and 34. 33 exists and 34 is similar, but 33 says high priority line in the area, site meeting required. 34 is field meet required, contact facility owner to schedule. 34 is there because there are times where a field meet might be required on a facility that does not meet the definition of a high priority subsurface installation. And while I won't belabor the going line by line, I want to highlight the importance of going line by line, and I would encourage the group to do that if you deem that there's appropriate time. But the required field meet, contact facility owner to schedule. I'll take the group back to a line strike that happened in Merrimack Valley on a low pressure gas system that resulted in a gas system being overpressurized, pushing gas on a low pressure system into residences that were not regulated at each house. And there were deaths and multiple explosions. One of the things that we have done as a gas distribution operator to prevent that is we require a standby near regulator stations on low pressure systems. We call those low pressure reg stations. And we will require a field meet to make sure within a much larger buffer zone than our typical standby of 5 feet or 10 feet. We'll require a field meet to understand the scope of work and oftentimes require a standby to be out on site and require that site to be manned, the regulator station to be manned or staffed, pardon me, with qualified persons to be able to operate those gauges in the event that there is an unlikely or unexpected strike to the pressure sensing lines or to SCADA in the area that would cause that system to go out of regulation and overpressurize residences. While that is not a high priority subsurface installation, it is a critical facility that does require additional steps. And to be able to communicate that information is something that would be important for an operator like PG&E or other gas operators in California. And that's only one potential example of a situation where communicating that information would be critical to the safety of the excavator, the safety of the system, and of course the public. There are absolutely times where, and it's not redundant to the higher priority. 34 is not. It is a separate and specifically separate requirement because it's not a high priority facility, but otherwise. I'll certainly pause for any questions or additional thoughts, and I would encourage the group to go kind of line by line, unless you would like us to do that on our own and specifically call out other code sections that we believe might still need to be there.
I agree, Steve, but going line by line, we don't have to take on the information because item the code 33 and 34, a great example of, particularly if it's not high priority type lines, then it will help in those lines that may be high priority to other folks that are not under the definition of high priority. So since you got both listed up, what will be the next one after? Is 40 still there?
Yes, 40. Yeah, 40 is still there. And I personally disagree from my perspective that it implies a failure on the part of the excavator to fulfill the obligations. It documents the completion of the work for our response to a ticket. And that we, in our case, the guidance in using this section 40 would only be after we have verified with the excavator that all of this work is completed. And it's not putting anybody on blast. It is being clear that we have verified with the excavator that they no longer plan to do this work. An example of that would be an emergency response to set a pole or to set a stop sign. We arrive out to the site, verify that the stop sign is now erect. Same thing with a utility pole out in the area. Contact the excavator. They advise, hey, it was an emergency job. We were done with it before you ever got out to respond to it. And then in that case, code 40 would be, in my opinion, an appropriate use of documenting our response out and that work was no longer needed, at least in the form of placing paint on the ground.
So what was the rationale on that? Because I agree, because even though the work is completed and everything, the hole's covered up and all this other stuff, who's to say they're not gonna come back?
And Mr. Johnson, was that a question for the room?
No, for staff. I'm just agreeing with Steve for the time.
Thank you, sir.
Any other feedback on the board?
Would you like me to continue down the list, sir?
You can do so if you want. That would be appreciated. Thank you.
Sure. And please feel free to jump in and stop me in the event that we spend too much time on something. The camera is turned off of the room and I'm not able to see, or at least it appears as though it is. I can't see it anywhere else. And I can't see if maybe there's ongoing conversation that needs to happen there. So please don't feel bad about jumping in.
You're fine. You can take over now. Thank you.
Section 41 is still in the system. This is excavator no-show for meat. And the rationale here implies the excavator is at fault for unmarked facilities. I don't believe that's the case. A time that excavator no-show for meat might be used, and appropriately so, is if a field meet had been scheduled or the excavator had agreed to meet on site to go over the scope of the job. And that's the time that the locate mark was going to happen. That person does not show up, is not able to be contacted by phone. And the only way to communicate that information back effectively for that locator would be to provide an electronic positive response. Again, remembering, at least in my understanding of the creation of EPR, this was to improve communication, not to hold anybody accountable. And while verification of communication may hold somebody accountable, that is not its intended purpose. It is intended just for the communication. So this would be able to let the ticket requester know that we had scheduled the time and the person who was supposed to show up did not show up. And that type of communication might be important for the scheduling of a second meeting.
From my perspective on that one, Steve, is that from an operator perspective, or one operator perspective, that you made the effort to come out there and they didn't show up, that I'm free to close the ticket out and move on. And I know that James brought this issue up earlier. It's our obligation fulfilled at that point in time. So most operators don't have the resources to keep coming back and forth to meet with someone if they don't fulfill their obligation being here. So.
We have excavators in the room or on the call that want to provide their perspective.
We have one hand raised from Miranda.
Enrique Miranda.
Yes, I think, though I understand your point in the component which is intended for, which is communicating. Unfortunately, and this, I understand this may not be the place to get into this because some of these conversations get very heated, but oftentimes these codes are used inappropriately. And unfortunately, they're applied when they are not necessarily accurate. Many a times, from personal experience, I have showed up to a job to meet with a locator, and I have been told, I've been given a code afterward saying that I was a no-show. And all that did is extend the time for the utility. So the remark that is on the right side of that table that says it implies the excavators at fault for unmarked facilities is an unfortunate consequence of what's going on. So be that as it may, in my opinion, for whatever it's worth, I think some of these comments on the right-hand side have come from the frustration from excavators, from the abuse of some of these codes. So though they're intended to be communicative, Oftentimes they're not. They somewhat get almost weaponized. And I'm sorry to say that, but that is the case, at least in my experience.
Enrique, this is Steve, and I want to recognize that that does happen, and that is unfortunate and unacceptable. An operator should not be using the system to manipulate things. I'm sure many folks there in the room know that PG&E had a history of that happening very publicly with an investigation that came after that. And lots of changes have been put in place. And so certainly not defending or not saying, hey, PG&E is great in this area, but just to say that I think that it does take a lot of time and effort and focus from a utility operator to give good guidance to their representatives that are going out and locating and marking to do the right thing the right way. And when we identify a failure, that we need to look into that, find out why it happened, and set corrective actions in place to prevent that from happening again. So we are not on two different sides of that concern, Enrique. I feel you, and I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, thank you. And I would in return, I would say I get that, and though we appreciate that SPG&E is not doing that, you are one of probably hundreds of utility owners across Southern California, and so we're in a position where those that are not, or better yet, those that are behind the power curve and doing them correctly, then what do we do in the meantime?
And again, that goes back to what James was saying. What resource do you have at that point? If you can't go to the one call center, they can do whatever they can by making a phone call. So from an excavator perspective,
If I could
Yeah.
comment on that, James Wingate, USA North 811. This is an issue nationwide, not just exclusive to California. Nevada has been talking about this quite a bit. I think most of you on the call know that USA North serves Nevada as well, and different law in Nevada, different stakeholders, and the excavators have requested a mechanism to dispute a code that they disagree with. The classic example being that they see a code that says negotiate a marking schedule, and the excavator says, nobody contacted me to negotiate a marking schedule. I don't know anything about this. And so the regulator in Nevada, Public Utilities Commission of Nevada, they're very interested in this. And so at their most recent meeting, they were talking about a mechanism to dispute, which will mean a software change on our side, because it'll be something along the lines of the codes are what they are, and their codes are a little bit different, but they're mostly the same as California's. But then if an excavator disagrees, then we need a way for them to mark that. And of course, the eventual way to have it all be transparent would be something along the lines of, if an operator wants to say negotiating marking schedule, then they have to input who it was they spoke to, date, time, phone number, or something like that to confirm that the schedule was negotiated, and then the excavator, can dispute that, I suppose. But by requiring documentation, the codes hopefully would be used properly every single time. I suspect they're probably being used correctly the vast majority of the time, but there are definitely times when we hear about them being abused, similar to what Enrique said and what I just described about the negotiating marking schedule. Thank you.
My name's Casey. I work with Henry at Cana Pipeline. I actually wrote down 50 negotiated marking schedule and showed it to Henry before he started talking, because that's something that we run into a few times where somebody will respond with that. And we're like, what are you talking about? We didn't negotiate any marking schedule. And then we're trying to go through all the phone numbers and call and speak to the right person, all when we have equipment and manpower at the job site getting ready to go. And so it's very difficult. So if there was a dispute button where we could do something like that, where forces the locators to come out there and remark or set something up would be really helpful.
Yeah, some response that we can respond to in their response, as opposed to the no, what is it called when you no response? There's a no response button currently on the Dig Alert webpage, and that is our only current alternative. And by the way, that's not a 1 day solution. That's a 2 day, 3 day wait. And we've got a lot of people and equipment on a job. And, all we're relegated to is submit a complaint to the Dig Safe Board or file a claim. Neither of which we've had a tremendous amount of success.
They both take a lot of time too. There's a lot of time to both of those.
Thank you, Enrique. We have another hand up by Steve.
It had just lowered by the system process, and I was going to continue on with the remainder, but wanted to make sure that the room was still ready to do that.
Thank you.
We'll go to the next one, Steve.
So 41 excavator, we talked about that one. 42, as Ann mentioned earlier, has been changed to system use only, so it is no longer available to be used, and it's an auto process when an excavator calls in to cancel their ticket. So I don't believe 42 is of concern. And then we go to 51. 51 is still in the system, but it's proposed for removal, and it's stated that it's redundant with code 50. We use both code 50 and 51 separately. So 50 is, and they are both separately referenced in Government Code Section 4216.3 A1A. So this is unless the excavator and operator mutually agree to a later start date and time, or otherwise agree to the sequence and time frame in which an operator will locate and field mark. Then it states an operator must do one of the following. So those are the two things that separate 50 and 51. So the negotiated marking schedule we refer to as a phasing plan. Imagine a project that is called in. The ticket sizes have been restricted by the one call centers to 1/2 mile in town, linear in town, and or half mile, I believe it is. And in the response to that, when we go out to a job, an excavator may say, "Hey, I'm actually starting here and working down. We expect to get 5, 6, 7, 10 houses a day." And we will phase that plan to get it marked out. So we're not going to mark it all at once, or they're not starting at a later date. They're starting on this date, but they've agreed to a phasing plan, which is what we call it. So 50, I believe, is the appropriate, and then 51 is not redundant to 50 in my opinion, because this is. The job was slated to start on this day. It's not actually going to start. So we haven't begun work. We haven't negotiated a plan to mark it as part of a sequence of events. We will get that ticket marked for them by a certain date. So their job's not going to start on this date. So we will agree to a phasing plan, but that phasing plan hasn't worked out yet because their work hasn't begun. So I believe that 50 and 51 are two distinctly identified in code 4216.3 activities, and they're both unique in the characteristics of each of those. And I believe that 51 should remain for that reason.
Do you have any comments from excavators on this?
So next one, Steve.
Next one is 53. 53 is still there. It's stated that it's redundant with code 50 and rarely used. Scheduled meet with an excavator at requested date and time. I believe that this is another form of good communication, that it states that we have agreed to a scheduled field meet out at the site, regardless of the purpose of that, whether it's to get a better idea of the scope of work, or it's because it's a required. Now, PG&E doesn't currently use that, so if it was removed, it would have no impact on operations. But in my involvement in the Ticket Continuity Committee, that was part of the discussion, is that the EPRs are intended to be a form of communication, and so it was left for that reason. And that's the last one on the list that 80 is still on there, but it's not proposed to be removed. So that's the last one on the list that's proposed for removal that still exists on the EPR schedule.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Steve. I would give 5-ish seconds if anyone wants to add any more comments on. Sure.
Matt Smud, I want to talk about 43, the not digging within 14 days. We were just talking to James on the break a little bit. I'm not sure about anywhere else, but kind of here locally in Rancho, we have, there's a lot of fiber going in. There's a lot of contractors coming from other states. And what we found out last year was they weren't getting paid. So they would submit 2 or 3 weeks worth of work and then they would leave. But now we have a ticket that's open. We haven't marked yet. Legally, as a locator, how do you get rid of it? So we were waiting for 14 days to expire and then using that. Because if the pre-marks are there and you can't get a hold of the guy, like how do you legally close? But we would wait for the 14 days and then use that. So it wasn't used often, and I'm not sure if anybody else runs into that scenario, but we ran into it on enough last year to talk about it now. I understand it's gone already, but something either being brought back or that one being brought back, something around that aspect that would protect the locator and the utility operator for the fact that you can't get a hold of the company, they're gone, you hear from the general that company's gone, somebody else is gonna do it maybe 2 months from now. You're not gonna waste your time marking because you're gonna be back in 2 months. Move on to the next bundle of projects you have. I'm not sure if Steve has anything to add on that one, if they run into that or not, but I know we ran into it enough last year. Seems to be kind of centered around phone projects. The owner will give it to one guy and then pull it. 2 weeks later, they'll give it to somebody else. Pull it 2 weeks later. You end up at the same location 20 times before somebody starts the work.
I'm not leaving you hanging, Matt. Yeah, we've seen that as well, but 43 has been removed from the system already.
Yeah.
Because we felt like that was an obligation of the of the operator to identify that information and then work through the appropriate responses based off of individual circumstances on it. That the blanket use of 43 was potentially more detrimental. Going back to Enrique's comments earlier, that it had more opportunity to be misused than it did to be used appropriately. So it's no longer in the schedule.
I would agree with that, but how are you guys in that scenario, like you just said you run into it too, in that scenario, how are you guys getting rid of the tickets? How are you closing them to protect yourself and the excavator? Maybe we can piggyback off of you in that scenario.
I'll have to take that one offline with you. Let me look into the exact scenario on it. You're a little bit closer to the work, being one of the folks who's out there putting paint down, and I don't want to misspeak.
That's fair. We'll talk later. Thank you.
Thank you both. More comments? Anyone online would like to pitch in?
Another comment from Enrique Miranda.
Yes, thank you. 2 final things. The first one is, my understanding based on earlier comments is that there is a difference between what is on the current Dig Alert website that shows the changes, the response codes released on 10/29/24, which came into effect 1/1/2025, in contrast with what we're looking at currently. Can anyone in this committee help me understand which one of those lists are we using, and what are we going to do about the difference between the two? Am I looking at on the team's webpage proposed change that are going to come, because some of those are in conflict with what's currently on the website. Some of them are already removed. So are those looking to come back? There's just some confusion there. So I'm trying to understand what is going to happen, given that those two lists are different. That's my first question.
Enrique, this is Brittany Brannaman with the Underground Safety Board. The EPR codes that are on the call center website, those are the current EPR codes.
Okay, got it. And then my next question is, there is also one additional challenge that we have, which is and I don't know if this is the right place or not, but earlier there was a conversation about what other challenges are there. One of the biggest challenges we face is the wrong phone numbers that are on the call center's webpage when we try to make contact with these facility owners. And I just don't know if there's anything that is currently being done for that, because that is one of the bigger challenges we are facing now.
This is Brittany Brandman again. We've heard that's a challenge. So I think right now the recourse would be, you can definitely contact the Underground Safety Board and submit a complaint and let us know. Not an immediate fix. And you could also reach out to the call centers and respond back to the ticket saying that the contact information is incorrect. That's something that we can look at a later time. There is a regulation that was passed a few years ago requiring current contact information, and we've had heard that that's just a challenge across the board to get that information. So definitely I would encourage you to fill out the complaint and let us know.
I'll comment on that, Brittany, if that's okay. James Wingate, USA North 811. We hear complaints on both sides of that at the call centers. We have utility operators who say, hey, I'm trying to get a hold of this contractor to talk to him about his ticket and the phone number's wrong. And then we also hear what Henry just said about, I'm trying to call this trying to call this utility operator and that phone number's wrong. So I can't speak for Dig Alert, but I suspect Ann will confirm, but both call centers, if we hear that a utility operator phone number is wrong, since they are a member of our association of utility operators, we will try to track down and say, hey, we heard from this excavator on this ticket number that they tried to call you with this number and it's wrong. Can you confirm your new number? Of course, if that's the only number we have too, then we may not be able to, but we will do everything we can to try to update that. The contractor one's harder. And as a general rule, we don't reach out. I mean, we were doing thousands of tickets a day. It's not very realistic, but we do point out the regulation that the Underground Safety Board passed requiring both of those parties to have current contact information on the ticket.
And that's something that I know in real time, if you submit a complaint, it's not going to fix the problem in real time. But if operators are having the challenge of not having contact information correct on a ticket, that is something we would want to know through the complaint process, because it will rise up to a policy issue. And it's something that we could discuss at a board meeting if this is a significant issue. So I do encourage everyone, we do have the complaint process that people can reach out regardless if it doesn't have to require a damaged facility, and that oftentimes throughout the year we'll review that and determine it will help set the policy agenda for the upcoming year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you everyone for your comments. There are no more additional comments. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Member Johnson to provide closing remarks and adjournment.
Okay, as we conclude today's workshop, I want to thank everyone for their participation. Those who participated, your insight and feedback are critical in shaping the future of the EPR process. Staff, ticket process committee, and the board as a whole will review today's discussion and use it to inform upcoming EPR recommendations. Additional stakeholders engagement will take place as we continue to refine EPR codes and processes. For those who wish to stay involved, please sign up for email updates or follow energy safety on social media. If you have any further comments, you may submit them in writing. digboard@energysafety.cal.gov. Finally, we wish to invite you to attend our next board meeting, which will be April 14th and 15th in Riverside, California, Southern California. And with that, this workshop is officially adjourned. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, everybody.